He didn't plan to stop, let alone spend $3. But the woman in chains wasn't what she seemed, and when she whispered his last name, the past he buried clawed its way back. What started as mercy turned into reckoning. Some ghosts don't stay dead. The bid started at $2, just loud enough to cut through the dry, crackling air. The trading post was little more than a sagging building slapped together with sun-bleached planks and sweat, but on that day it was full. Mostly men, mostly rough, drawn by the promise of livestock, rifles, and this time something colder. Something worse. She was dragged out by the chain around her ankles, wrists bound tight in front, head low beneath a curtain of black hair that hadn't seen a comb in weeks. Dust clung to her skin like shame. No one said her name, just the girl. No age given, no crime explained. Just shackles and a label, unclaimed property. The man who made the first offer had a voice like gravel and a face carved by too many mean years. No one looked surprised. The trading post's owner, a man called Billings with the smile of a butcher and the eyes of a clerk, leaned against the rail with a lazy grin. $2 going once, he drawled. Ain't she worth more than a sack of nails? Chuckles. Another voice called out $2.50, and then a third $3. That third voice wasn't a shout, just a statement. Flat, quiet, and cutting clean through the noise. Jonah Voss didn't mean to say it. It just slipped out. He'd only stopped at the post for salt and fresh tack, barely off the trail an hour. His coat was still dusted with the red grit of the picos, and his boots hadn't cooled. He didn't care for crowds, didn't care for people much at all. But something about the girl, how she kept her chin down, how her shoulders didn't tremble even when men laughed and spit and leered, made him feel a thing he hadn't felt in a long while. Wrong. Billings squinted. $3, he scanned the crowd, but no one topped it. Going once, going twice sold. You got silver, mister. Jonah didn't answer. He stepped forward, reached into his coat, and pulled out the coins. $3 silver, dull from travel. Billings took them with a shrug. Take her then. Not my problem anymore. The girl didn't look up until Jonah reached for the chain. Her wrists were raw where iron bit skin, and her breath hitched when he touched the lock. He didn't say a word, just unlatched it slowly, gently, like he was afraid of breaking something already ruined. When the shackles hit the dirt, the clatter made everyone go still. The girl didn't move. Not yet. Jonah glanced at her face. Young, but not as young as he'd thought. Late 20s maybe. Dirt smudged her cheeks, but the lines of her jaw were proud, stubborn. Her eyes, when they met his, were dark, not afraid, but measured. Cold fire, not ash. "What's your name?" he asked low. She looked around once, then leaned in. Her voice cracked like a match struck too dry. "Calla." He waited. She swallowed. "Calla Voss." His breath stopped in his chest. The name hit like a thrown horseshoe to the gut. Not because it was familiar, because it was his name. Not common, not borrowed, Voss. Behind him, someone laughed. "Guess he bought kin," someone joked, not realizing Jonah had gone still as a fence post in winter. Calla didn't smile. She just stared at him like she was daring him to run, or remember. He took her by the elbow, not roughly, but with enough purpose to move her, and walked toward his horse, hitched at the far end of the post yard. The crowd muttered, watched, but didn't interfere. You didn't interfere with a man who moved like Jonah Voss did, not unless you were ready to pay for it. He hoisted her gently onto the saddle, then mounted behind her. They rode out without a word. It wasn't until the second mile that Jonah finally spoke again. "Where'd you get that name?" Calla didn't turn. Her back stayed stiff, but her voice was steady now. "My mother gave it to me." "And your father?" "Didn't know him, never saw him, just knew his name. Jonah Voss, a cowboy, left before I was born." His hands gripped the reins tighter than necessary. The trail blurred. Calla felt it. "Was that you?" Jonah didn't answer, because he didn't know what answer was worse. The shack she sat in that night was modest. One room, one cot, one stove. Jonah hadn't meant to bring anyone back here, ever. He hadn't spoken to anyone for longer than a supply run in 3 years, But she was asleep now, if you could call it sleep, curled in a corner with a blanket and a knife hidden beneath her arm. She hadn't trusted him, not really. Just like he hadn't trusted her, not really. But both had needed something, and maybe for now that was enough. He sat by the stove, watching the flames lick iron. That name kept turning in his head. Calavas, his name. He'd left a dozen years ago, walked away from a woman in Kansas who'd begged him not to ride out. He hadn't looked back, couldn't. Some men ran from the law, Jonah had run from himself. And now here she was, not a ghost but close. He dozed off in the chair, boots still on. Dreamt of red earth and a woman crying, voice sharp with fury and forgiveness all tangled up. He woke before dawn. The blanket where Calla had slept was empty. The knife was gone too. He stepped outside into a cold gray that hadn't decided yet whether it would storm. Her tracks were fresh in the dirt, headed north, fast. He saddled up in seconds. The trail was clear for the first mile. Then it was. The prints stopped at a bend and something else took over, hoof prints, 4 of them fresh, sharp, leading off into the canyons. Jonah's stomach turned. Whoever took her didn't waste time. He followed. The second cliffhanger was sharper than the first. He found her scarf snagged on a branch, blood on the edge. Not much. Enough. Enough to feel like the past was punishing him for every mile he'd ever tried to outrun it. The tracks led down into the red canyons like bloodlines into old wounds, narrow, twisting, and carved by things that didn't care if you made it out. Jonah didn't slow. His horse fought the incline, hooves skidding on loose rock, but Jonah's jaw was set hard as granite, eyes scanning the trail like he could will the truth out of dust. The hoofprints veered right at the split, down into a gulch barely wide enough for a wagon, and Jonah followed without thinking. He didn't ask himself why. Didn't stop to wonder what he owed the girl or whether she really was his blood. None of that mattered now. She was gone, taken, and something deep in his chest clawed to life at the thought, something angry, something old. He found the first sign a mile in. A broken branch freshly snapped, then a heel drag in the dirt. Someone had stumbled, not willingly. And then a smear, rust dark against the sandstone. Jonah swung down from the saddle, crouched low, and touched it with 2 fingers, still wet. She wasn't dead, not yet. He pressed on, silent. The canyon widened into a dry basin scattered with scrub and the skeletons of long-dead trees. A campfire smoldered near the edge, downwind. Jonah dismounted, tied the reins loose, and approached on foot. He didn't need to get close to see them. 3 men, 2 upright, 1 pacing, 1 squatting beside something. Or someone. Calla. Her arms were bound again, this time with rope, not iron. 1 man knelt beside her, poking at her with the butt of his rifle like she was a trapped animal. She didn't flinch, didn't beg, just stared straight ahead like she'd left her body behind. Jonah felt his hand twitch toward the Colt he hadn't drawn in months. He waited, breathing slow, counting their movements. The pacing man, narrow frame, nervous hands, twitchy, carried a revolver but didn't know how to wear it. The squatting one was worse, smiling like this was sport. The third was quiet, older, the one Jonah pegged as the brains. He stood with a rifle slung easy over his shoulder, watching the others without joining in. Jonah knew the type. Not the one who did the hurting, the one who ordered it. He stepped out from behind the rocks without warning. Morning. All 3 heads snapped around. Calla's eyes widened. The older man turned fully, eyes narrowing as he assessed Jonah. You lost, friend. Jonah's hand stayed low, near the grip of his gun but not on it. Not especially. You with her? The pacing one asked, voice a notch too loud. I paid for her, Jonah replied, and though the words sounded cold in his own mouth, he let them sit there. $3 even. That makes her mine, don't it? The squatting man laughed, spit, stood. You should have paid 4. Maybe she'd be worth something then. Jonah didn't smile. You got 3 seconds to untie her. The camp went still. Even the wind held its breath. The older one, leader, clearly tilted his head. You threatening us? Not yet. What's your name, cowboy? Voss. Something flickered in the older man's eyes. He stepped back slowly, like he'd touched a stove. Voss, he echoed. Jonah didn't blink. Yeah. Jonah Voss. Behind him, Calla stirred. The ropes around her wrist tensed with her breath. The leader's hand moved toward the rifle, smooth and slow, but Jonah was already moving. His colt barked once, sharp and final. The leader staggered back, a bloom of red spreading across his coat. The squatter dove for cover. The twitchy one screamed and fired wild, missing everything. Jonah dropped him with the second shot, then turned. But the third man was already gone, vanished into the rocks. Coward or smart, didn't matter now. Jonah ran to Calla. Her hands were raw again, her lips split, but she was alive. He knelt, cut the ropes with his knife, and caught her as she sagged into his arms. You came back, she whispered, voice hoarse. I shouldn't have let you go. I didn't go, I ran. I know. They didn't say more, not yet. There wasn't time. Jonah hauled her up onto his horse, then mounted behind her. He glanced once at the bodies, still, final. He hated the weight of it, hated how easy it was to become that man again. But the blood had already dried on his palms by the time they left the canyon. They rode for hours, not speaking. Calla leaned against him, shivering despite the sun. Her silence wasn't fear, it was exhaustion, and Jonah felt the same way. When they reached the shack, he didn't carry her inside. She walked, stubborn, her shoulders set. She took the cot without being told. That night, Jonah built a fire that didn't need building and sat watching it again. You gonna ask me, she said from the cot. Ask what? If it's true. He didn't turn. I already know. She sat up slowly, rubbing her wrists. You left her, my mother. I did. She said you were kind once. I was. What happened? Jonah took a long breath. She got pregnant. I got scared, real scared. Told myself I couldn't be a father, that I wasn't made for it, so I left. Told myself it was the right thing, that she'd be better off without me. Calla watched him through the flicker of the flames. You were wrong. I know. Silence again. You don't owe me anything, she said after a long time. I owe you everything, Jonah replied. He looked at her finally. She wasn't a girl anymore. She'd been hardened by the world, shaped by pain he'd helped cause. But there was steel in her and something like grace. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but something close enough to hurt. Jonah stood, walked outside. The night air bit sharp, but he welcomed it. Then he saw it. Smoke. Not from his chimney, from the south ridge. He turned fast, scanning. A second plume, then a third, signal fires or something worse. Calla stepped beside him. You see it too. He nodded. Someone's coming. Not someone, many. He didn't know how he knew. He just did. The feeling crawled up his spine like it used to in the war, just before the ambush, just before the ground opened up. We need to move, Calla said, already turning. Jonah caught her arm. You can't run again. I'm not running, I'm getting ready. And just like that, he saw it. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. She was done surviving, now she was going to fight. But the real question wasn't who was coming. It was why. Why had 3 strangers taken Calla from the trail? Why had that man flinched when he heard the name Voss? And why were signal fires rising in the distance now? Something was unspooling. Something Jonah hadn't buried deep enough. By the time the sun cracked over the ridgeline, the smoke was gone. Just ash trailing skyward, already eaten by wind. But the message had been sent clear as gunfire. Whoever had lit those plumes wanted to be seen, wanted to make it known that Jonah and Calla weren't alone anymore. Trouble was coming, not fast but steady, like water seeping through cracked boards. The kind of danger that didn't rush, because it knew you'd be there when it arrived. Jonah spent the early morning checking the land around the shack, 10 slow laps, boots crunching frostbitten weeds, eyes scanning for tracks that didn't belong. Nothing yet. Calla worked inside, silently boiling coffee, gathering what little supplies she could. She didn't ask where they were headed. She just packed like a woman who'd done it too many times to ask why. But they didn't leave, not yet. Because Jonah had one last thing to do before they vanished. He didn't explain it to her, just saddled up and rode out with nothing but his rifle and a length of rope coiled at his side. She didn't stop him, didn't press for answers. She just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, hair loose in the wind, watching him ride off like she already knew he wouldn't come back the same. He rode southeast, toward the trading post. The same place he'd bought her for $3. Only this time, he wasn't buying anything. The place looked different now, emptier, quieter. A few horses tied outside, a wagon with a broken wheel leaning against the fence, a drunk slumped on the porch with a bottle resting against his ribs like a second lung. Inside, the stink of tobacco and rot clung to the air like mold. Jonah pushed through the door without pause. Billings was behind the counter, counting coins. He looked up, blinked once and didn't smile. Didn't think you'd be back. Jonah didn't speak, just walked to the counter, placed both hands on the worn wood and stared, hard. Billings cleared his throat. If it's about the girl I told you, wasn't my problem once you paid. You knew who she was, Jonah said quietly. A flicker barely there in Billings' eyes, didn't know her name. But you knew who she was. She was shackled freight. Sheriff dropped her off with no name, no charge sheet. Said he'd come back, never did. She sat out back for near a week before I figured someone take her off my hands. You didn't ask questions. Billings scoffed. You think this is a courthouse? Jonah leaned forward. Who was the sheriff? A pause, then Mallory, out of Sundown County. Jonah's stomach went tight. He knew Mallory. Knew the whole damned family. Once years ago he'd ridden with them, fought beside them, trusted them, and that was before he knew what kind of law they believed in. The kind that bent whichever way the richest hand pulled. The kind that didn't just protect landowners but hunted the ones without land. They'd called it justice. Jonah had called it something else. That was the ride that broke him, the ride that made him disappear, and now they were coming again. He turned to leave. Wait, Billings said quickly. You gonna bring her back? Jonah stopped in the doorway. She's not a horse, Billings. No, but someone's common. Men were asking around yesterday, looking for her, said she'd run off, said she was theirs. Jonah looked back, slow and cold. She's nobody's. And then he was gone. He didn't ride fast. He rode hard. Hours passed like minutes. His jaw clenched so tight it hurt. The sun crept higher but gave no warmth. Every hoofbeat thudded like a drumline toward war. When he reached the shack, Calla was waiting, rifle in hand, packed by her feet. She didn't ask what he'd found. She just said, "They're getting close, aren't they?" He nodded. Calla glanced at the sky. Then we shouldn't be here when they arrive. But Jonah shook his head. We will be. Her eyes narrowed. You want to wait for them. I want to finish this. Calla studied him. They'll come heavy, maybe a dozen men. Then we better be smart. Why not just go? Jonah met her gaze. Because if we run forever. You won't ever stop looking over your shoulder, and neither will I. Calla looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. She just turned and walked inside. That night they dug in. Jonah reinforced the windows, laid broken bottles beneath the eaves, prepped a line of old traps he hadn't touched in years. Calla boiled water, counted bullets, sharpened blades that had dulled with time. Neither of them slept. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows that danced like ghosts on the wall. At some point, Calla sat down across from him. You really think you're my father? I don't know what I think. My mother said you were gone before I could talk, that she wrote letters you never answered. Jonah's throat felt full of sand. I didn't deserve them. She used to sit on the porch every night at dusk, said maybe you'd ride back in. I didn't. She died when I was 14, fever. I buried her myself. Jonah closed his eyes. I hated you, she said, for a long time. I don't blame you. But now, I don't know, maybe I just wanted to mean something, all of this. Jonah nodded, me too. Before either of them could speak again, the dogs started barking. Not their dogs, the wild ones. The ones that slept in the canyons and only howled when something bad was coming. Calla stood. Jonah already had the rifle in his hand. They stepped outside together and saw the torches. Down by the creek, a line of lights bobbed slowly toward them. Riders, 10 at least, maybe more. Leading the way was a wagon, black, tall, boxy. Jonah's skin went cold. He knew that wagon. It belonged to Sheriff Clayton Mallory himself. They didn't speak, just watched. The riders stopped at the edge of the property, waited, and then a single figure moved forward, slow and confident. Calla sucked in a breath. Jonah didn't ask, he already knew. Sheriff Mallory dismounted with a grace that didn't fit his bulk. His coat was trimmed with silver. His boots were polished. His gun hung low like a trophy. He raised a hand. Jonah Voss, ain't seen you in a long time. Jonah didn't move, didn't expect to ever see you again. You've got something that belongs to me. She doesn't belong to anyone. Mallory smiled like a man with too many teeth. You still righteous, Voss, after all these years? I never was, just tired of being wrong. Mallory nodded, then give her to me. No. The smile faded. You don't want to fight me, Jonah. Not for me, Jonah said, stepping closer. But I'll burn this place to the ground before I let you take her. Mallory stared at him, then at Calla. Then he whistled. 2 men hauled something off the wagon, threw it into the dirt. It was a man. Barely breathing, bloodied, one eye swollen shut. Calla screamed. Jonah rushed forward, but Mallory drew his gun. I wouldn't, he said calmly, unless you want to watch the rest of him die. Calla fell to her knees beside the man. Her hands shook as she touched his face. Levi. Jonah froze. He knew that name. Calla looked up, eyes burning. My brother. Mallory's smile returned. Found him snooping around our records. Said he was looking for a name. Said he had questions. Jonah clenched his fists. Mallory holstered his gun. I'll give you till dawn. And then he turned and walked away, leaving the night thick with threat. Calla held her brother's hand like it was the last thing tethering her to breath. Jonah stood still, eyes on the fire. And somewhere deep inside, something shifted. He thought this was about atonement. He hadn't realized it was about war. They worked in silence through the cold, black hours that followed. No one mentioned dawn. No one said the word surrender. Jonah cut cloth into bandages while Calla cleaned her brother's wounds with water so cold it made her hands cramp. Levi drifted in and out of consciousness, too far gone to talk, but his eyes fluttered open enough times to keep hope alive. He was young, younger than Calla by a few years, and bore a resemblance sharp enough to split. Same cheekbones, same stubborn chin. And when she brushed the blood from his temple, there was something else in his face too. Jonah saw it. Something that reminded him of the woman he'd left behind in Kansas. Jonah stepped out to give her space. The wind was biting now, cutting across the hills with the clean intent of a blade. The fire Mallory's men had started down by the creek still smoldered in the distance, casting that sick yellow glow that never looked like warmth, just warning. A reminder. They would be back. And not to talk. Jonah paced the perimeter again, checking every trap, every trigger line. They defortified the shack as best they could, turned it into a place that could hold for a while, but not forever. He counted bullets twice, even though he already knew the number. It didn't add up to survival. Back inside, Calla hadn't moved from Levi's side. She looked up as Jonah stepped in, her eyes ringed with the shadow of too many sleepless nights. "You think they'll wait till dawn?" "No," Jonah said. "I think they'll wait till we believe they will." She nodded, jaw tight. "Then we wait too." Jonah crossed to the table, poured 2 tin cups of coffee from the kettle left warming on the stove. He handed her one. Her fingers were trembling when she took it. "Tell me about him," Jonah said quietly, eyes flicking to Levi. Calla exhaled slow. "Smart, always too smart. Reads anything he can get his hands on. Told me once he was gonna find out everything you ever did. Said if I didn't care about the past, he'd care for both of us." Jonah looked down. I think he wanted to know where he came from," Calla said. "We were born with no real father, no map, just stories. He hated not knowing, so he looked, and they found him." Jonah closed his eyes. "It's my fault." "No," she said quickly. "It's Mallory's, and the rest of them, it's not yours." Jonah wanted to believe that, but guilt clung to him like a wet coat that wouldn't come off. Dawn crept up slow, gray, and hesitant. Jonah stood at the window, watching. Calla sat beside Levi, who now slept with a steadier breath. Every sound outside felt like it might be the first hoofbeat, the first crack of a rifle, but nothing came. Not yet. Instead, they saw the boy. A rider, barely more than a child, appeared at the ridge, alone. His horse was sweating, foam lacing its mouth. Jonah raised his rifle but didn't fire. The boy stopped a few yards off, raised one hand. "Message," he called, voice thin against the wind. Jonah stepped outside slowly, rifle still in hand. The boy held out a folded piece of paper. "From Sheriff Mallory," he said. "It's a mercy." Jonah took the paper, opened it. A single sentence. "You bring her down the hill before the sun hits noon, or your sins die with her." He looked at the boy. "What's your name?" "Wade," the boy said nervously. "I just deliver." "You believe in mercy, Wade?" Wade blinked. "I don't know." "Then you're smarter than most." Jonah turned and walked back inside without another word. Calla was on her feet now. What did it say? He handed her the note. She read it once, then again. "They'll kill us." "They'll try. We can't fight them all." "No," Jonah agreed, "but we can give them something to choke on." She nodded, set her jaw. "Then let's make it hard." Jonah reached beneath the floorboards and pulled out the tin box he hadn't touched in 3 years. Inside were sticks of dynamite, 6 in all, wrapped in oilcloth and packed tight. Calla raised her eyebrows. "You always keep explosives under your bed." "Not for sleeping," he muttered. They spent the next hour rigging the perimeter, placing charges where the land narrowed, where riders would be forced to funnel through. Calla helped without flinching, hands steady, eyes hard. There was no panic in her now, just purpose, and that scared Jonah more than anything. She was becoming like him. Before they finished, Levi stirred. Jonah knelt beside him. "Can you hear me?" Levi blinked slowly. "You him?" "Yeah." The boy coughed. Don't let her die." "I won't. She's all I got." Jonah felt the words hit something deep. "She's all I've got now, too." The first shot cracked through the morning like a hammer on bone. The windows shattered, glass spraying the floor. Jonah shoved Calla down, returned fire. Dust kicked up near the tree line as men scrambled behind cover. They were early. Jonah cursed, grabbed his rifle, and flung open the door. He fired twice, deliberate, measured. One man fell screaming. Another ducked. "They're coming," Calla shouted. Jonah turned just in time to see riders break the tree line. 6 of them fanned out, rifles raised. The shack lit up with return fire. Wood splintered. The stove groaned as a bullet tore through its side. "Levi," Calla cried, crawling to shield him. "Trap line," Jonah barked. She nodded, scrambled toward the east wall. He followed, tossed her a match. She lit the fuse, slid it beneath the floorboards, and ducked. Boom! The earth bucked, screams cut through the smoke. The east trail was gone, blown into a gash of fire and rock. 3 down, that left 7, maybe 8. They kept coming. Jonah grabbed the second charge, lit it, and threw it blind out the west window. It rolled once, twice, then vanished behind a log pile. Another explosion. More screams. Then silence. Jonah dropped to his knees, breathing hard. His hands were shaking, not from fear but memory. The sound of fire, the crack of bone. This wasn't his first war, but he'd sworn it would be his last. Calla crawled to him, dirt streaking her face. They're regrouping. How many left? She hesitated. At least 4. Jonah nodded. Then we make 4 graves. They didn't wait for the next wave. This time they attacked. They moved through smoke and brush like ghosts, silent and focused. Jonah shot one man clean through the chest before he could lift his rifle. Calla knifed another in the thigh, dropped him with a scream. A third turned to run, and Jonah let him. Let one live. Let him carry the fear back. Only one left. Mallory. They found him standing by the creek, gun lowered, face pale. Jonah raised his rifle. Mallory didn't flinch. She ain't worth it. She's worth everything, Jonah said. She's a runaway, always was, caused trouble in every town she passed through. Jonah glanced at Calla. You run. Calla lifted her chin. Everywhere I had to. Mallory scoffed. She lied, stole, fought. She's a criminal. So were you, Jonah said coldly. And I rode with you. That's what shames me most. Mallory's smile turned bitter. She's your mistake, you know it. No, Jonah said, and his voice didn't waver. She's my blood. And then he pulled the trigger. The echo rolled over the land like thunder. Mallory fell without a sound. Calla didn't move, just stood there, fists clenched, eyes burning with something that wasn't grief and wasn't relief, just the empty middle ground of survival. Jonah stepped beside her. The sun was rising full now, washing the world in gold that didn't feel warm at all. We're still not safe, Calla whispered. No, Jonah agreed, but we're free. Behind them, Levi stirred. Ahead of them, nothing was promised. But for the first time in a long time, Jonah Voss didn't feel like a man running from his name. He felt like a man who'd earned it back. The bodies were buried before the sun reached its peak, 4 in all. Jonah dug the graves himself, hard, slow work, not out of respect, but because Calla couldn't look at another corpse, and Levi was still too broken to lift his own head. She sat in the doorway with her brother's hand wrapped inside hers, staring into the distance like maybe, if she didn't blink long enough, the world would forget to give her more pain. The ground was half frozen and full of stone. Jonah's hands bled before he'd even finished the second hole, and by the 4th, he'd stopped caring whether the men had names. Names didn't mean much anymore. Men like Mallory carved them into signs and badges, and then filled them with whatever poison they chose. Didn't make them real. When the last grave was filled and the cross was marked, Jonah didn't say anything. He just took his hat off and stood there for a minute, breathing hard through his teeth, boots planted deep in churned-up earth. Then he walked back to the shack, not looking over his shoulder once. If any of Mallory's men had survived, they wouldn't be coming back. Not to this place. Not to her. Levi woke properly by late afternoon. His voice was hoarse, his lips cracked, but he gripped Jonah's wrist when he saw him kneel down. You the one brought her here? Jonah nodded. I am. Levi's throat moved like swallowing sand. You her father? A beat, then Jonah answered, I think I am. Levi stared for a long time. Then he closed his eyes and whispered, You better act like it. And Jonah didn't argue. That evening, Calla moved with purpose, quiet but focused. She cleaned the stove, scrubbed dried blood from the floor, even mended one of Levi's shirts though her stitches came out crooked. Jonah watched her from the porch as the sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the sky in streaks of blood orange and gold. There was something about her now that hadn't been there before. Not hardness. Not exactly. More like a stillness. The kind that comes after fire when there's nothing left to burn but the bones. He walked in just as she was folding the last clean cloth. "You should rest," he said. She didn't look up, too much to do. "Won't get less if you drop." "I won't drop." "Calla." She stopped folding, turned toward him. Her eyes were sharp, steady. "They won't stop." "No." "They'll find out what happened. Someone always talks." "I know." "And when they come, whoever they are, what then?" "We fight again," Jonah said quietly. Calla's shoulders sagged a little, not in defeat, just in exhaustion. "You got enough fight left in you." Jonah glanced at his bandaged hands, at the blood caked into the grain of the floorboards. "I got just enough." Calla didn't answer, just walked past him and stepped out into the night air. They stood side by side under the stars. Levi slept behind them. The shack was still, a piece of driftwood in the ocean of dark hills and distant echoes. "You know," she said finally, "you left her." Jonah didn't answer. "I don't say that to cut you. I just want you to know I know. I don't remember much about my mother, but I remember the way she said your name, like she still hoped, like every time she opened the door it might be you." He exhaled slow. "She never said a bad word about you," Calla went on. "Not one. That's the part that hurt the most, that she loved someone who never came back." Jonah's voice was raw when he said, "I wanted to, I meant to." "But you didn't." "No." The silence grew thick between them, not cruel, just old. "She died believing you were dead," Calla said. "Sometimes I think that's what kept her kind." Jonah nodded once. "I won't run again." "You already did." "I mean from now on." Calla looked at him for a long, long time. Then she said, "You better mean it," and walked back inside. He stayed there a while, watching the stars move like ash across the sky. The next day they packed. Not in a rush. This wasn't a flight. It was a migration, a choice. Jonah saddled the horses while Calla bundled food and stitched coins into the lining of her coat. Levi moved slow but stubbornly, leaning on a carved stick Jonah had cut for him that morning. They said little, just the kind of silence that came when people knew exactly what had to be done. By mid-morning, the shack stood empty. Jonah took one last look around, at the ridge, at the half-burnt barn, at the scars in the dirt that marked where men had bled. Then he turned and didn't look back again. They rode west. Jonah didn't ask where they were going. He figured Calla had a destination in mind, and he was content to follow for now. He rode behind, letting her lead. Levi, still fragile, rode with her. The trail was narrow, winding through scrub and pine, then opening into dry grass valleys that shimmered in the afternoon light. They made camp before sunset near a stream that hadn't gone dry yet. Jonah skinned 2 rabbits and Calla cooked them. They ate in silence, but it wasn't tense, just tired. That night as the fire crackled low, Calla asked him, "Did you love her?" Jonah didn't need to ask who. "Yes," he said, "but I wasn't good to her. I didn't know how to be." "Do you know now?" "I'm trying." She nodded slowly. Levi was asleep again, his breathing more even now. "You think this ends?" she asked. "The running, the fighting?" Jonah poked at the fire. "I think it changes, doesn't end, not really." Calla lay back against her bedroll, staring at the stars. "I want to believe people can change." "They can. But not all of them." "No." She rolled on her side, face half-shadowed. "So what makes you think you're different?" "I don't," Jonah said quietly, but I'm still here trying." That seemed to be enough for her, for now. They slept under the stars, side by side, not touching but close. And for the first time in years, Jonah Voss dreamed of something other than gunfire. The next town was called Morrow Creek. Not much of a place, 2 streets, 1 saloon, a chapel that hadn't seen a preacher in months. But it had a doctor, and that was enough. Jonah took Levi there while Calla waited outside, arms crossed, face wary. The doctor was young, too young, and wore spectacles that slid down his nose. "Bullet broke a rib, maybe 2, he said, listening to Levi's lungs. "Could have punctured something, you're lucky it didn't." Jonah nodded. "He gonna be all right. With rest, clean bandages, and food." They paid with the last silver coin in Calla's coat. That night they rented a room over the livery stable. Jonah didn't sleep. The walls were too thin and the wind had changed. It smelled like smoke again, distant but real. Trouble maybe not close yet, but watching, waiting. In the morning, Calla found a poster nailed to the chapel door. A wanted notice. It wasn't her face. It was Levi's. Jonah tore it down before she could say anything, but he saw it, the flicker in her eyes. She wasn't surprised, just tired of surprises. They moved again, quickly. For the next 3 days they traveled in silence, but something was shifting in Calla. She grew more watchful, more withdrawn. One night when they made camp near an abandoned homestead, she asked, "Why do they want him?" Jonah stirred the coals. Mallory said he was looking through records. Maybe he found something he wasn't supposed to. "Like what?" "I don't know." "But you think he did?" Jonah nodded. Calla looked toward the sleeping shape of her brother. "He never told me." "He was protecting you." "I don't want protection, I want the truth." "You sure they're different?" That question stayed with her through the night. They reached another town 2 days later, Red Hollow, bigger than Morrow Creek. Stranger too, something about the way folks stared too long. Jonah left the horses with the stableman and went to find supplies. When he came back, Calla was gone. Levi hadn't seen her leave. Jonah searched the town. Nothing. He checked the saloon, the general store, even the station. Still nothing. He found her 2 hours later, outside the sheriff's office, talking to a man with a scar along his cheekbone. She turned as Jonah approached. "I know why they're hunting Levi," she said. Jonah froze. Calla's hands were clenched, her eyes were burning. The scarred man held out a folded paper. Jonah took it. It was a birth record. From a courthouse 2 counties east. Levi's name. Calla S. And Jonah S. Jonah stared. "Where did you get this?" "He found it," the man said. "Months ago, it's what started all this. He was trying to prove something." Calla looked at Jonah. "Prove what?" The man took a breath. "That you're not just her father." Jonah frowned. "What are you saying?" The man's voice dropped. "You're Mallory's brother." The paper crumpled in Jonah's hand as if his grip alone could undo what was written there. But ink didn't lie, and the scarred man, who called himself Elias Care and claimed to have once ridden with Mallory back when Mallory still took orders instead of giving them, looked Jonah straight in the eye, without pity or apology, as he said it again. "Your kin." Calla hadn't blinked since she'd heard it. Her hands were folded tightly in front of her, and there was a tremble at the corner of her mouth she kept swallowing back. The air between them felt like a fuse burning toward something they'd both been too stubborn to see. Jonah shook his head slowly, voice a rasp. "That's not possible." Elias shrugged. "Records don't care what's possible. Your mother's name was Ruth Mallory. Left her husband when you were 2, took you west, changed your name. You were Jonah Voss by the time she remarried, but before that." "No," Jonah said again, firmer this time. "I never knew him, never heard of him till years later." "Didn't have to," Elias said. "Blood don't wait for permission." Calla stepped back like the air had shifted beneath her feet. So all this, them hunting us, wasn't just about me. No, Elias said, it was about him and Levi. Jonah's throat was dry. What about Levi? Elias reached into his coat, pulled out another paper, this one thinner, more worn. Your son looked deeper than you thought. He didn't just find your past. He found a will. Mallory's father left everything to his heirs, which by law included you, included Levi. The paper hit like a bullet. They were gonna lose everything, Elias said. Land, money, power, and your boy, he found out, made copies, started talking. Jonah stared. That's why they came for him. Elias nodded. And why they'll keep coming. Calla didn't say anything. She turned and walked slowly to the other side of the street, boots crunching on gravel like a ticking clock. Jonah didn't follow at first. Just stood there, holding that damn paper in hands that had held rifles, shovels, dynamite, but never this kind of weight. When he did follow, she was staring out past the edge of town, where the road wound west through cottonwoods and low hills. Her shoulders were squared, but the way she held herself was different. Not like a woman afraid, like a woman deciding something final. Say it, she murmured. Jonah stepped beside her. Say what? That you didn't know, that you couldn't have known, that if you had, you'd have done something, stopped him, found us sooner, say anything. He wanted to, but he didn't. Because it wouldn't matter, not now. I ain't him, Jonah said instead, no matter what that paper says. She looked at him then, eyes hard. You're not, but you're his brother. He didn't try to deny it. Levi's got something in him, she whispered. Something angry. I used to think it was just the world, the way he was treated, the way people looked at us. But now I think it's blood, and I don't know if I can love it out of him. You already have, Jonah said. Look how far he's come. She shook her head slowly. He came because he was trying to fix what you broke. Jonah didn't answer. He couldn't. The next morning, Elias was gone. Left nothing but the papers and a note. Don't follow. Just be ready. They left Red Hollow before sunrise. This time there was no argument about direction. Calla took the lead again and Jonah followed without question. Levi was stronger now, though not whole. He rode alone, a little behind, eyes watching everything. By dusk they reached a ridge overlooking a long, dry valley. Below, a river ran through it like a scar. There was smoke rising from the east, distant but steady. Riders. Jonah set up camp with his back to the fire. He couldn't rest, couldn't stop thinking about what Elias said, Ruth Mallory. He remembered the name only vaguely, more a dream than a memory. A woman with long dark hair, a voice like music, a laugh that echoed in empty halls. His mother. But she had left that name behind, taken Jonah far from the man who bore it, from everything tied to it. Dee thought she was running from poverty, from pain. Now he wondered if she'd been running from blood. Calla sat across from him, arms wrapped around her knees. They'll keep chasing us, she said. You know that. I do. Then we can't keep running. No, Jonah agreed. We have to end it. Levi looked up. How? Jonah didn't answer, not yet. But he had a plan. They reached the old rail crossing the next day. The tracks hadn't carried trains in years, but the station house was still standing, a squat stone building with walls thick enough to slow bullets. They took shelter inside. Jonah scouted the valley while Calla and Levi reinforced the doors. He came back at sundown with a sack of dynamite and a map. I know where they're coming from, he said, and how they'll get here. Levi took the map, studied it in silence. Then he looked up at Jonah. I want to help. Jonah hesitated. You're still healing. I don't care. I need to do something. Calla started to protest, but then stopped, looked between them. All right, she said, but you listen every word. Levi nodded. They spent the night rigging the bridge. Jonah placed the charges himself, showing Levi how to set the fuse, how to bury the wires. Calla kept watch, her rifle never leaving her side. By morning it was done. And by noon they saw the riders. 9 of them. Not Mallory's men, new faces, but cut from the same cloth, pale hats, dark eyes, that same calm, confident cruelty. They rode slow, like they had all the time in the world. Jonah waited until they were nearly across. Then he lit the fuse. The explosion split the air. The bridge buckled, screams echoed. 2 horses fell into the gorge. 3 men never made it to the far bank. The others scattered. But they didn't retreat. They circled. Waited. Jonah knew what was coming. The siege lasted 2 days. The station held barely. They rationed bullets, patched holes, took shifts sleeping. Calla shot 1 man through the chest as he tried to climb the north wall. Levi took out another, his first kill, and didn't speak for hours after. By the 3rd night, the riders tried fire. They torched the barn nearby, the grass around it. Flames leapt high, heat searing. Jonah looked at Calla. We have to move now. They grabbed what they could, slipped through the rear door under cover of smoke. But the riders were waiting. They took fire. Jonah dropped 2 more men. Calla hit another, but Levi. He stumbled. A shot rang out. He cried out, went down. Jonah turned back, bullets whistling past his ears. No, Calla screamed, dragging her brother behind a broken fence. Blood soaked his side. He was conscious barely. Jonah covered them, firing until his rifle clicked dry. They were pinned. Smoke, fire, bullets. And then, a whistle. Sharp. Unmistakable. From the ridge. Jonah looked up. Riders. But not the enemy. 20 strong, armed fast. Elias. He led the charge like a man born for battle, rifle blazing. The ambushers didn't stand a chance. Within minutes, it was over. Jonah stared stunned. Elias trotted up, dismounted, told you to be ready. Calla dropped to her knees beside Levi, sobbing. Jonah knelt beside her, checked the wound. Through and through, he said, he'll live. She nodded, clutching her brother's hand. Elias looked down. They won't come again, we cut the route. Mallory's allies are scattered, the rest scared. Jonah met his eyes, thank you. Elias shrugged. Wasn't for you, was for her, for the kid. That night they lit no fire, just sat in the dark, letting the quiet settle. Jonah looked at Calla. I'll go, he said. She frowned. What? If you need space, I understand after everything. Calla stared at him. Then she said, I never asked you to be perfect. No, but you deserved better. I deserved the truth, she said, and you gave me that. A long silence. Then she said, stay. And for the first time in years, Jonah Voss felt like he belonged. The rain came 3 days later, gentle at first, then steady, the kind that softened the ground and lingered in the air, smelling of ash and dirt and something like renewal. The siege had passed, the smoke had cleared, and for once there were no hoofbeats echoing in the distance. No shadows riding the horizon, just the slow drip of water from the eaves of the rail station and the steady rise and fall of Levi's chest as he slept. Calla sat beside him on the cot, her hands stained with dried blood and salve, her hair limp with rain, her eyes so tired they looked hollow. But she didn't sleep. Not yet. She sat there watching her brother breathe, and every few minutes she reached out and touched his shoulder, just lightly, as if reminding herself he was real. Jonah stood in the doorway. He hadn't said much in the days since the fight, hadn't needed to. His place wasn't to speak, not now. It was to rebuild the fence Levi had leaned against when he was shot, to mend the saddle Calla's boot had torn, to dig the shallow graves of the last 3 men who had followed Mallory's orders to the bitter end. He hadn't asked for thanks. He hadn't looked for forgiveness. He just worked. Because after a lifetime of wandering, of running from the things he'd broken, he'd finally found something worth staying for. And staying meant proving it. When Levi stirred, it was slow. The kind of movement that spoke of bruised ribs and a body not ready to carry weight. But his eyes opened clear, and his voice, when it came, wasn't weak. "You stayed," he said. Cala's face crumpled just a little. She nodded. "Of course I did." Jonah stepped into the room. "You gave us no choice, boy, getting shot right in front of us like that." Levi smiled faintly. Seemed like the right time. Cala swatted at him. "Don't joke." But her voice shook, and she didn't try to hide the tears. Jonah watched them from the doorway. Something in his chest pulled tight. Levi looked up at him. "They're gone. For now." "You think that's the end of it?" "No," Jonah said, "but it's the start of something else." They stayed at the station for a week. The rain came and went. The wounds began to heal. Elias and his men had moved on, taking the last of the horses and the bulk of the dynamite with them. They left Jonah a note scrawled on the inside of a whiskey label. "You still owe me one. E." Jonah kept it in his coat. Cala began to walk again. Not far, just circles around the clearing, but each day her steps grew longer, her shoulders straighter. She spoke little, but the lines on her face began to ease. She'd carried so much for so long. Jonah had no illusions he could take it from her, but he could walk beside her, and when she stumbled, he could steady her without needing to be asked. One afternoon, she asked him to teach her how to shoot. Not with anger, not for revenge. Just to know. So he took her out behind the station, set up cans on a split-rail fence, and handed her his revolver. She held it awkwardly at first, too tight like it might slip away, but by the third shot her hands had steadied. The fourth hit the can dead center. She didn't smile, just nodded once, lowered the gun, and said, "Again." They practiced every day. By the end of the week, she could reload without looking. On the 9th day, Levi walked outside without help. He stood in the sunlight with his eyes closed, breathing deep, like he was trying to memorize the air. "What now?" he asked. Jonah looked at Cala. She didn't answer right away. "There's a homestead up near Alder Run," she said finally. "Belonged to my mother's cousin, long abandoned, but the land's good. Used to be peach trees." Jonah raised an eyebrow. "You want to farm peaches?" She shrugged. "I want to try." Levi looked between them. "We going?" "Only if you want to." He nodded once. "I'm tired of running." Jonah mounted the wagon first. Cala sat beside him, Levi in the back. They left the station behind before noon, the wheels creaking, the ruts muddy, the horses slow but steady. For the first time it didn't feel like a chase. It felt like a choice. They reached Alder Run by dusk the following day. The land was rough, overgrown, but the cabin still stood. Weather-worn, leaning to one side but whole. A barn sagged nearby. A windmill creaked in the breeze. Cala walked the perimeter in silence, touched the doorframe with her fingers, then nodded. "It'll do." They settled in, fixed the roof, cleared brush, planted seeds Jonah wasn't sure would ever grow. Cala kept the revolver close, but she also started keeping a journal. Jonah caught her writing once by candlelight. When he asked what it was, she said simply, "Names, things worth remembering." He didn't press. Levi found a dog, stray, half-starved but loyal, named it Trouble. Jonah laughed until his sides hurt. They didn't talk about Mallory, or the past, or the paper that proved Jonah's blood was tangled in all of it. That weight stayed between them, but not like a wedge, more like a thread, a reminder. They didn't have to talk about it. They just had to live better than it. But the quiet couldn't last. Not forever. One morning, as Jonah rode into the nearby town for supplies, he saw the poster. His face. Not Cala S. Not Levi S. His. Wanted for impersonation, obstruction, and unlawful inheritance claims. It was his brother's signature at the bottom, stamped beneath the seal of the territorial office, legally binding, impossible to ignore. Mallory had made it official. Jonah stared at the poster until the ink blurred. They weren't chasing ghosts anymore. They were declaring war. When he returned, Calla knew something was wrong before he said a word. She didn't ask, just waited. Jonah tacked the poster to the wall. Levi read it, jaw clenched. "What does it mean?" he asked. "It means," Jonah said, "he's making a move, and it won't stop with paper." Calla looked at him. "Then we make ours first." He met her gaze. And this time it was her who said it. "We end this." They made a plan. It wasn't clean, it wasn't safe, but it was the only way. Mallory had power, but not roots. He ruled through fear, through paper and bribes and guns. Jonah had something different now. He had people, Calla, Levi, Elias maybe if they could find him again, and he had nothing left to lose. They packed light. Calla left the journal on the table, tucked beneath a small stone. She didn't take the revolver, she wore it. Levi carried only one thing, a ledger, the one he'd hidden from Mallory's men, the one that held copies of everything he'd found, records, names, dates, the truth written plain. They left trouble with the neighbor girl who came by sometimes with eggs. And they rode out. Not away from danger. Toward it. They reached the capital 3 days later. The courthouse stood tall, columns bright against the morning sun. Jonah tied the horses, squared his shoulders, and stepped through the doors with Calla beside him. They didn't wait for permission. They walked straight to the clerk, handed over the ledger. The man blinked. "What's this?" "Truth," Calla said. "Proof," Levi added. "And a reckoning," Jonah finished. The man stared at the names, the seals, the signatures. Then looked up. "You understand what this means?" Jonah nodded. "It means he doesn't own the story anymore. We do." There were hearings, testimonies, questions. But the documents held, the signatures matched, the seal was authentic, and most damning of all, Mallory never showed. He sent lawyers. None of them could explain why his father's will had been buried, why Jonah's name was scratched out in pencil on one copy and untouched on another. And by the third week, the court ruled in Jonah's favor. Not just on paper. Legally. Publicly. They published the decision in every paper across the territory. Will found to be genuine. Inheritance returned to rightful heir. Mallory had lost. But Jonah didn't go after the land. He didn't want it. He didn't want a mansion, or a badge, or a name carved into courthouse marble. He wanted the cabin at Alder Run, the orchard, the peace. He rode back with Calla and Levi as the leaves began to turn gold. There were no more ambushes. No more riders. Just sky. Just wind. Just the promise of another morning. Spring came late but not empty. The orchard didn't bloom, not really, but there were buds, small ones, stubborn. Jonah knelt to check the soil every morning, fingers pressing into the dirt like he could will something into growing. Sometimes he found Calla already out there, crouched with a trowel, humming under her breath, and sometimes he just watched her. They didn't talk much about what happened. Not about the siege, not about Mallory, not even about the ruling. The court had ruled in Jonah's favor. Mallory hadn't come. He'd been found dead in his office days later, a bullet through the head, no witnesses, no answers. They called it suicide. Jonah never said otherwise. He burned the letter he found under the porch, a final one, unsigned in Calla's handwriting with nothing on it but a name, Ruth Mallory. Jonah didn't speak of it, but he saddled his horse 2 days later and rode east. The house was smaller than he expected. She opened the door without surprise. "You're him," she said. "I knew you'd come." She was old, tired, a shadow of something once sharp, but her eyes hadn't changed. They watched him like they still had the right. "You left," he said. "You were too young to remember, but yes." Jonah's voice was quiet. "You let him raise me like I was his." She looked away. "I thought you'd be safer." "I was." No apology came, but no lie either. After a long silence, she said, "He never could bury the truth, not really." Jonah nodded once. He tried. Before he turned to leave, she asked, "Do you have anyone now?" He thought of the orchard, of Levi laughing in the creek, of Call's hand brushing his in the morning light. "Yes," he said, "I do." She closed the door without another word. Jonah rode home with the wind behind him. The ridge came into view at dusk, and the cabin lights glowed like a promise. Calla stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching like she always did when he was late. He dismounted slow, met her eyes. "It's done," he said. She nodded, "Good." Jonah looked toward the trees, the soil, the life that hadn't grown yet, but would. "Let's start fresh," he said. Calla took his hand. They went inside. And this time when the door closed, it stayed shut.